Venezuela. Today we begin to examine the deteriorating situation in Venezuela, which has regressed into severe economic, political, and human rights crisis. This hearing follows the subcommittee's field hearing in Miami last November on human rights abuses in Venezuela and Cuba, where we heard testimony from victims of abuse at the hands of Maduro and the Castro government. Our purpose in meeting today is to understand the situation in Venezuela and the impact U.S. businesses operating in the country and the Obama administration's policies and actions on this issue, both within the OAS, or Organization of American States, and the region at large. Since the founding of our country, the United States has supported freedom for all people around the world. And I want the people of Venezuela to know that the United States stands with you right now. You are the ones who are suffering the most from this crisis, and I applaud your courage to pursue freedom, justice, and democracy through the constitutional channels which you have. The situation in Venezuela today is truly heartbreaking. Despite possessing rich natural resources and the largest oil reserves in the world, Venezuela is going through an extremely severe economic crisis. Last year, Venezuela's economy contracted 7%, and today multiple economic forecasts are projecting that the country will default on both sovereign debt and the debt of the state-owned oil company PDVSA. In fact, according to Venezuela's central bank data, its external debt is estimated to be $185 billion. To put that in perspective, Argentina's 2001 default was a little over $100 billion. This year, Venezuela's economy is projecting a negative 8% growth and inflation of 720%. Right now, 76% of the population is unemployed, and last month, Venezuela saw its largest monthly oil production decline according to OPEC. Today, there are widespread shortages of energy, food, and medicine. The Maduro government has been rationing electricity, recently ordering a 5-day weekend for the public sector to save electricity. Food shortages affect 82% of the population, which wait an average of 4 hours in line to obtain basic foodstuffs. 9 out of 10 homes do not eat 3 meals a day. This situation has led to more than 50 food riots and deaths of at least 5 people. In response, the government launched a program to distribute goods door to door, but this program has essentially amounted to government control over who eats and who doesn't in Venezuela. When Venezuelans visit hospitals, medicine is missing 80% of the time. Sadly, this is affecting the most vulnerable. Infant mortality has increased 100 times since 2012, largely because hospitals cannot operate incubators where there is no power. Venezuela also reported over 400,000 cases of the Zika virus, but the government has done very little to respond. The crisis has extended to other aspects of social and political life in Venezuela. The people have not been silent. Spontaneous social unrest, multiple lootings, violence, and widespread protest, even in traditional Chavista strongholds, are occurring daily. The Observatory of Social Conflict, a local NGO, found that there were 52 lootings and 641 protests just last month, which is a 37% increase compared to the same time last year. Large groups of armed criminal gangs also control vast swaths of territory in urban areas, terrorizing populations and leading to one of the highest murder rates in the world. Not only has the government failed to respond well, it has also committed widespread human rights abuses and undermined democracy in the country. This horrific crisis in Venezuela has led to a surge in the number of Venezuelans seeking asylum in the United States, and I'm concerned about the migration implications for the region at large. In February 2014, anti-government protests throughout the country sparked brutality from security forces. The Maduro government violently suppressed the protests, killing at least 43 people, injuring 800 more, and arresting 300 others. Today, the government has imprisoned over 4,000 people for political purposes, and there are also at least 93 political prisoners in Venezuela, including opposition leader Leopoldo Lopez. Only a few weeks ago, the National Police fired tear gas at protesters who were chanting, "We want food." In response to these events, and the Venezuelan government's support for terrorism, the U.S. imposed sanctions, visa restrictions, or asset freezes on a few Venezuelan companies for supporting Iran, 2 Venezuelan individuals for supporting Hezbollah, several Venezuelans for drug trafficking, and 62 Venezuelan individuals for corruption and human rights abuses. Recently, the Obama administration imposed sanctions on 7 Venezuelan individuals for human rights abuses. However, the Obama administration could do much, much more. Today, many government officials in Venezuela who are directly responsible for human rights abuses and the deterioration of democratic institutions, public corruption, and drug trafficking remain free to access U.S. financial systems. This is not right. And in view of the especially horrendous situation in Venezuela right now, the Obama administration should be doing more to resolve the humanitarian crisis, support a democratic outcome, and ensure that those responsible for committing human rights abuses and subverting democratic institutions no longer receive access to U.S. financial system at the very least. Last week, Secretary Kerry announced that the United States and Venezuela would launch high-level diplomatic talks and that the U.S. would lead talks between the Maduro government and the opposition. This week, Ambassador Thomas Shannon is in Venezuela for these talks. In ambiguous and confusing language, the Obama administration is supporting dialogue efforts, the OAS Secretary General's efforts to invoke democratic charter, and the recall referendum in Venezuela. Yet the Obama administration has simultaneously rewarded President Maduro with diplomatic talks and affirmed publicly that the U.S. does not support suspending Venezuela from the OAS. I want to note that after Secretary Kerry's announcement last week, Venezuela's National Guard brazenly arrested 2 opposition activists, Francisco Marquez and Gabriel San Miguel, over the weekend. Both remain detained and have been denied access to legal counsel. Marquez is a U.S. citizen. These men should be released immediately, as should all political prisoners at the very least, before Ambassador Shannon meets with President Maduro this week. The United States sent conflicting messages to the world about Venezuela that do not make sense. The Maduro government controls the presidency, a majority of municipalities, the Supreme Court, the military leadership, and PDVSA leadership, not to mention most of the media. Only the National Assembly is controlled by the opposition, and it has been undermined time and again by Maduro's Supreme Court. Democracy is failing in Venezuela, and Venezuela does not have time to waste. So far, only OAS Secretary General Almagro has stood firm on these points. The administration should have greater courage of conviction to send a clear U.S. message. Release all the political prisoners, accept humanitarian aid, hold a recall referendum this year, and submit to the Venezuelan people's wishes to resolve this crisis. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about these issues, and I'll now turn to the ranking member from New Jersey, Mr. Sirius, for his opening remarks.